The rain fell in sheets, a cold, unending deluge that turned the air raid siren into a muffled wail. A blur of red and blue lights sliced through the downpour, painting the chaos of the crash site in a strobe-lit nightmare. Twisted metal, shattered. Glass and the smell of ozone and leaking gasoline hung heavy in the air. A mangled sedan, its front half accordion folded around the thick trunk of a century-old oak, smoked ominously. This wasn't an accident. It was a detonation. Officer Lena Petrova pushed her way through the throng of emergency personnel. Her face, usually a mask of calm, was grim, her eyes scanning the scene with practiced intensity. At her side, Axel, a massive German shepherd with a coat the color of dark wheat, moved with a silent, purpose-driven grace. His ears were low, but his nose was a whirlwind of activity, processing the cacophony of smells, blood, fuel, rain, and something else. Something. Metallic and sharp. They were a single unit, a well-oiled machine in the midst of pandemonium. "I need you to stay out of the hot zone, Petrova," Sergeant Miller barked, his voice straining to be heard over the noise. "This is a fire and rescue op now. You and the dog are on crowd control." Lena didn't break stride. "I see a potential survivor, Sergeant, the back seat." Miller swore under his breath, but the urgency in her voice cut through his protocol. "Fine, but you have 30 seconds, Petrova. We've got a possible fuel leak. This whole thing could go up any second." Without another word, Lena gave Axel a silent command. The dog's ears went up, and he surged forward, his focus locked on the wreckage. He didn't hesitate, scrambling over a jagged piece of the car door and disappearing into the twisted interior. A moment later, he let out a short, sharp bark, their signal. He had found someone. Lena followed, squeezing through the narrow gap, where the rear passenger door had been. The inside of the car was a ruin. The air was thick with the smell of scorched upholstery and something sickly sweet, blood. A small boy, no older than 10, was wedged between the crumpled seat and the roof, his legs trapped under the dashboard. His eyes were wide with terror, not at the wreckage, but at something else. Something Lena couldn't see. "Hey, kid," Lena said, her voice dropping to a calm, soothing whisper. She unclipped her radio and tossed it to a medic. No one needed to hear this. "You're okay? My name is Lena. This is Axel. We're going to get you out of here, I promise." The boy tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling gasp came out. Lena could see the rising panic in his eyes. Axel nudged the boy's hand gently with his snout, a calming gesture. "Just breathe with me," Lena instructed, her hands already searching for a way to free him. The metal was bent, a tangled mess of steel and wires. It was like trying to untangle a knot made of razor blades. "What's your name, champ?" "Leo," he rasped. My mom." "We'll find her, Leo. Just focus on me. We're going to get you out." Lena could feel the car shifting, groaning under the weight of the massive oak. She had to work fast. She braced her foot against the chassis and pulled, using all her strength to bend a piece of metal just enough to free his leg. He cried out in pain, a sharp, heart-wrenching sound. I know," Lena said, tears welling in her own eyes, but she blinked them away. "Just a little more. You're so strong, Leo. You're a little hero." The second leg was worse. It was pinned, under a support beam. She couldn't pull it free without risking more injury. She had to use a different approach. She signaled to a fireman with a jaws of life on the other side of the car, pointing to the specific spot. He nodded, but as he moved to get the tool, the car groaned again. A new wave of smoke billowed from the engine. The fire was getting closer. "No time!" Lena yelled. "Get him out!" The fireman moved with lightning speed, grabbing a pry bar. He jammed it into the crevice and put all his weight into it. The metal shrieked in protest, and with a final desperate twist, it gave way. Lena grabbed Leo, pulling him into her arms just as a cascade of glass and twisted metal rained down from the roof. She didn't stop, stumbling back out of the car. Axel right behind her, shielding her with his body. She carried the boy to the waiting paramedics, who immediately began to work on him. As they laid him on the gurney, his eyes fluttered open one last time, locking onto Lena's. He reached for her, his small fingers fumbling at her uniform. The bag, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sirens. The bad man, don't let them have it. He slumped back, his eyes closing, a single silent tear tracing a path down his smudged cheek. Lena stood there, frozen, the boy's words echoing in her mind. Miller's voice brought her back. He's lucky to be alive, Petrova. Now let's get you. And the dog checked out. We've got the scene secured. We'll be here all night with the cleanup crew. You're done. But Lena wasn't done. The look in the boy's eyes, the sheer terror that had nothing to do with the crash itself, gnawed at her. And the words, the bag, the bad men, weren't the ramblings of a child in shock. They were a plea. She looked at Axel. He was looking. Back at her, his head cocked, his ears still focused on the scene. He'd picked up on something, too. The scent of fear, of something wrong, lingered. We're not done yet, boy, Lena murmured to her canine partner. She ignored Miller's orders, her instincts screaming louder than any superior officer ever could. She led Axel to the perimeter of the crash site. The paramedics had taken Leo and were tending to his mother, who had been found thrown clear of the vehicle, seriously injured but alive. But the boy hadn't been worried about his mother. He'd been worried about a bag. Find it, Axel, Lena said, her voice low and direct. Find the bag. Find what he was scared of. Axel didn't need another command. He was already on the hunt, his nose to the ground, moving in slow, deliberate circles around the wrecked car. He worked the perimeter, sniffing at the broken glass and splintered wood, then pushed into the deep, rain-soaked brush that bordered the road. Lena followed, her heart pounding a heavy rhythm against her ribs. She was a cop, not a detective. She was a canine handler, trained for search and rescue. But this felt different. This felt like a cold case unfolding in real time, the air still thick with the aftermath of violence. Axel suddenly stopped, his tail, giving a low, focused wag. He let out a single, definitive woof and began to dig, his powerful front paws tearing at the mud and wet leaves. Good boy, Axel, Lena said, kneeling beside him and helping to clear the debris. Her fingers hit something solid, something wrapped in a thick, waterproof material. She pulled, and with a grunt, a heavy, dark green duffel bag emerged from the mud. It was wrapped meticulously in duct tape, a professional job. Lena looked around. No one was watching. The first responders were all focused on the car, the injured, the cleanup. She unzipped her jacket, shielding the bag from the rain and prying eyes. She took out her knife, slicing through the thick layers of tape. She pulled the zipper. Inside, it wasn't what she expected. Not drugs, not cash. It was a series of heavy-duty, reinforced folders, each marked with a strange, cryptic code. There were also several small, sealed data drives. And at the very bottom, in a separate, small canvas bag, was a key card, a small black burner phone, and a small, tarnished silver locket. She opened the locket. Inside, a miniature photograph of a young woman and a little boy, Leo, smiled back at her. The same boy she'd just rescued, a cold dread washed over her. This wasn't an accident. This was a hit. Just as the realization hit her, the sound of a vehicle door closing nearby broke the silence. It wasn't the sound of an ambulance or a police cruiser. It was the heavy, dampened thud of a luxury SUV door. Lena turned slowly, her heart now a frantic drum against her ribs. A sleek black Escalade had pulled up behind them, its lights off, a silent shadow in the storm. Two men in dark tactical gear, not uniforms, stepped out. They were professional, and they moved with a chilling, predatory precision. Their faces were impassive, their eyes scanning the scene, their gaze finally settling on Lena and the bag at her feet. "The boy said you found something," the taller of the two men said, his voice calm, flat, and devoid of emotion. He wasn't asking a question. He was making a statement. His hand, she noticed, was resting on the butt of a firearm at his hip. He wasn't a cop. Lena's world went silent. The wail of the sirens, the hum of the generators, the drumming of the rain, it all faded away. The only sound was her own panicked breathing and the low, menacing growl that began to rumble deep in Axel's chest. He knew. He'd known from the moment he found the bag. The final devastating twist wasn't what she'd found in the bag, but what? She suddenly realized about the locket. The boy, Leo, had been wearing one just like it. She had seen it when she pulled him from the wreck, a small glimmer of silver against his torn shirt. The locket she held in her hand wasn't his. It was the second half of a pair. The two men took a step closer, their eyes fixed on the bag and then on her. The rain washed the world clean, but it couldn't wash away the chilling, terrifying truth. She wasn't just a rescuer anymore. She was a target, and the boy's rescue had just plunged her and Axel into a world of shadow and violence she was completely unprepared for. The final words of the tall man hung in the air, a chilling promise. "Hand it over." The tall man's words hung in the air, a final chilling note in the symphony of the storm. "Hand it over, officer. This doesn't have to get messy." Lena's training screamed at her to comply. Her years on the force had taught her that when a situation escalated to this level, de-escalation was paramount. But this wasn't a standard patrol call. This wasn't a bank robber with a handgun or a domestic dispute gone wrong. The look in the men's eyes wasn't of criminals. It was of professionals, a cold, surgical focus that promised absolute certainty. And in their world, messy wasn't a negotiation tactic. It was a consequence. Axel, sensing her hesitation and the imminent danger, let out a low, guttural growl that resonated with the force of a tectonic shift. He was a 100-pound shield of muscle and instinct, his posture a low crouch, his eyes locked on the men. He wasn't just a dog, he was a weapon, and his loyalty to Lena was absolute. "Step back," Lena said, her voice betraying none of the terror that was now a cold knot in her stomach. She slowly took a step back, her hand moving almost imperceptibly toward her sidearm, a gesture more for effect than anything else. She knew she couldn't outgun them. She needed a moment, a single moment. The men didn't move. The rain poured down, plastering her hair to her face, dripping from the brim of her hat. "Don't be a hero," the second man, shorter and stockier, finally spoke. His voice was a rasp, like sandpaper on steel. "That boy's life depends on you making the right choice." The words were meant to be a threat, a final persuasion. But to Lena, they were a promise. The boy wasn't a witness. He was a hostage. This wasn't about data. It was about control. That was all she needed to hear. She dropped the bag, not to surrender it, but as a distraction. As the bag hit the ground with a solid thud, she gave Axel a single, non-verbal command. The one they'd practiced for years. The one that meant attack. Axel didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, a furry missile of teeth and fury. He didn't go for the kill. His objective was to create chaos. He slammed into the taller man's legs, sending him sprawling into the mud, his gun clattering uselessly away. The stockier man, caught off guard, instinctively raised his hands to shield. His face. That was the moment Lena had been waiting for. She scooped up the bag, turned, and bolted. She wasn't an Olympic sprinter, but years of chasing down suspects had given her a punishing endurance. She plunged into the thick, thorny underbrush, a dark, churning sea of wet leaves and grasping branches. She could hear the men yelling behind her, the curse of the tall one as he tried to scramble to his feet, the crash of their bodies as they followed her into the woods. The woods were her territory, her home. She and Axel had trained for hours here, navigating the treacherous terrain in all conditions. She moved with a silent, desperate grace, her mind a frantic GPS, charting the quickest path to safety. A thorny branch whipped across her face, leaving a stinging welt. Another caught her jacket, a sharp tear of fabric. But she didn't stop. She ran, her lungs burning, the weight of the bag a heavy, swaying pendulum against her side. Axel, a shadow at her heels, was her guardian. He let out short, sharp barks, guiding her, herding her away from the pursuers. She could hear them getting closer, their heavy boots crunching through the undergrowth, their desperate, angry shouts a rising tide. Suddenly, a searing pain tore through her shoulder. She stumbled, a gasp of pure shock escaping her lips. The thud of a silenced bullet hitting a tree nearby told her all she needed to know. They weren't just chasing her, they were hunting her. She didn't look back. She plunged deeper. The pain. In her shoulder, a fiery protest with every stride. Axel, sensing her injury, let out a deep, ferocious howl and turned back, a ghost in the trees. Lena didn't have time to process his choice. She had to keep moving. She ran for what felt like an eternity, the world reduced to the desperate thud of her own heart and the ache in her shoulder. She finally burst out of the tree line and onto a small, deserted access road. The rain was finally starting to let up, replaced by a fine, misty drizzle. She was a few miles from the crash site, in the middle of nowhere. She collapsed against the base of a gnarled old oak, the same kind of tree that had crumpled the car. The irony was not lost on her. She fumbled with her phone, her fingers numb with cold and shock. She had to call for backup, but as her thumb hovered over the emergency dial, she paused. The men had been too fast, too professional. They had known where to look. They had known she would find the bag. They weren't just random thugs. They had inside information. They had to. She looked at the duffel bag she had clutched so tightly. She couldn't trust anyone, not until she knew what was in it. And who knew she had it? With a deep, shuddering breath, she forced herself to her feet. Her shoulder was on fire, a hot, radiating ache that made her lightheaded. She knew she couldn't go to a hospital. Not yet. She needed to disappear. She hobbled down the road, the only thought in her mind to find a safe place. A place to think. A place to assess the damage. She remembered an old fishing cabin her family used to rent miles away in the deep woods of the Oak Haven Reserve. It was remote, forgotten, and most importantly, it was off the grid. The next few hours were a blur of adrenaline and pain. She managed to hotwire a beat-up old pickup truck she found in an abandoned shed, its engine groaning to life with a cough of black smoke. She drove with one hand, the other clutched tight against her bleeding shoulder. Axel found her a few miles. Down the road, jumping into the passenger seat, panting heavily. A deep gash ran along his flank, a testament to his bravery. Finally, as dawn broke, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and violet, they reached the cabin. It was small, bigger than a single room, nestled by a cold gray lake. The air was damp and smelled of pine and wet earth. Inside, the dust lay thick on everything, a silent monument to a forgotten time. She tended to Axel's wound first, cleaning it with a bottle of old antiseptic she found in a dusty first aid kit. He whined softly, but never once struggled. He was her constant, her rock in this rapidly unraveling reality. She then turned her attention to her own wound. The bullet had grazed her, a deep, ugly gouge that was still bleeding sluggishly. It was a close call. A few inches to the left, and she would have been dead. She cleaned and bandaged it as best she could, her fingers clumsy with cold and fatigue. With the immediate crisis dealt with, she finally sat down, the bag in her lap, her heart still thumping a frantic rhythm. It was time. She opened the duffel bag again. The contents were exactly as she remembered them. The folders with the strange codes, the data drives, the burner phone, and the key card. She picked up the locket. It was tarnished, the silver aged, but the photo inside was clear. A smiling woman, the same woman she had seen on the gurney just hours before, and the little boy, Leo. His smile was missing, replaced by the terror she had seen in the car. The locket she had found on the boy was a mirror image, the other half, of a heart. She picked up the burner phone. It was old, a relic from a different era, but it was fully charged. She hesitated, her mind racing. Was it a trap? A beacon? A single chilling thought. They might be able to trace it. But what if it was a lifeline? What if the boy's mother had left a message? She turned it on. The screen flickered to life. A single, unread text message. It was a coded message, a series of numbers and letters, but it was followed by a single word. Elias. Elias. The name hit her with the force of a physical blow. Elias Vance, her old training officer, the man who had taught her everything she knew. He had retired years ago, a shadow of the man he used to be after a major case went cold. She hadn't spoken to him in years. She knew she couldn't call him on this phone. It was too risky. She found an old landline in the cabin, a dusty, corded phone she wasn't even sure worked anymore. She dialed his number, the one she had memorized years ago. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then a gruff, tired voice answered. Vance. Elias, it's Lena. Lena Petrova, she said, her voice shaking with a mix of relief and fear. I think I'm in trouble. I think I'm in over my head. Silence. For a long, terrifying moment, she thought he had hung up. Lena, he finally said, his voice softer, but with a hard edge of concern she knew all too well. What's going on, kid? You sound like you've seen a ghost. Worse, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I found a ghost. A case you used to work on. The Miller case. More silence. This time it was a heavy, suffocating weight. The Miller case, the one he never talked about. The one that had broken him. The car she had just pulled the boy from. The mother's last name was Miller. Where are you? He asked, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. Lena hesitated. She still couldn't be sure who to trust. Not even Elias. Not yet. She told him the general location, but not the specific cabin. I'm off the grid, she said. I can't be found. Good, he said, and she could almost hear the click of a gun being cocked on the other end of the line. Listen to me, Lena. Do you have the bag, the one with the folders and the drives? Yes. How did you know? She asked, her heart sinking. Because the same people who tried to kill me tried to kill her tonight. And they're not going to stop. Not until they get what's in that bag. It's the evidence, Lena. All of it. Everything that got swept under the rug is in that bag. Who are they? The people who run this city and a hell of a lot more, he said. The distant wail of the siren was a mournful dirge for the life Lena had just lost. It was a sound she had lived by, a call to duty, a promise of order. Now, it was a predator's cry, hunting her down. She stood at the small, grimy window of the cabin, the old phone still in her hand, staring out at the mist-shrouded lake. The image of Miller's face, the casual dismissal, the thinly veiled threat replayed in her mind. It was a trap, meticulously laid, and she had walked right into it. She hadn't just saved a boy. She had become the evidence. Axel, she said, her voice a raw whisper. The dog, his head resting on his paws, opened one eye and thumped his tail softly against the worn floorboards. We're not the good guys anymore. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of her new reality. Her badge was a lie. Her uniform, a target. Every face she'd ever trusted was now a question mark. Elias had told her not to trust anyone, and he had been right. Miller had sold her out. And if he was willing to do that, who else was in on it? The corruption ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. She turned from the window, the pain in her shoulder a constant reminder of her precarious situation. She needed to think, but her mind was a whirlwind of frantic, disconnected thoughts. She needed information. She needed to know what was in the bag, what was so important that people were willing to kill for it. She sat on the floor, the duffel bag between her and Axel, like a shield and a key. She took out one of the heavy coded folders. The cover was blank, save for a single alphanumeric code. Project Nightingale 42. The inside was filled with dense, technical documents, financial reports, legal filings, and what looked like architectural blueprints. It was all encrypted. She didn't have the key, and even if she did, she didn't have a way to decrypt it without a secure network. The data drives were the same. She picked up the burner phone again, the single word Elias now screaming, a silent warning. She had to assume it was a message from the boy's mother, the one person who knew what was going on. A message meant for Elias, a last resort in case something went wrong. But why had she hidden it? Why not just hand it to him directly? It didn't make sense. Unless Elias was the one who had disappeared, the one who had gone dark. He hadn't trusted anyone either. A soft, rhythmic scratching at the cabin door broke her train of thought. Axel's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his throat. He moved silently to the door, his posture tense. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She was alone, in the middle of nowhere, and the only other living thing was a wounded dog. "Who is it?" she called out, her hand now on the cold steel of her sidearm. She was in plain clothes, her uniform ripped and bloodied, but the weight of the gun felt like a brand of her old life. "It's Elias," a voice answered, muffled by the thick wooden door. "Open up, Lena. We don't have a lot of time." Lena hesitated. She was torn between the desperate hope that it was him and the cold, cynical dread that it was another trap. "Prove it," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Last time we saw each other, I told you I'd retire when a good dog taught me to sit," he said, and she could hear a hint of a tired smile in his voice. "And you said, I've got just the dog for you, Elias." It was a private joke, a memory from a different lifetime. Relief, hot and overwhelming, washed over her. She unbolted the door, her fingers fumbling with the rusty lock. She pulled the door open, her gun still trained, just in case. Elias Vance stood on the porch, a weary gray-haired specter in the pre-dawn light. He was a shadow of the man she remembered, his face lined with a hard-won exhaustion, his eyes haunted by a past she was just beginning to understand. He was holding a large, beat-up toolbox. "Don't worry," he said, seeing the gun in her hand. "I brought my own, and a soldering iron. We've got a lot of work to do." He stepped inside, his gaze immediately going to the duffel bag on the floor. He didn't even look at her, at the bloody bandage on her shoulder. His focus was absolute. He knelt down, rummaging through the bag, his movements precise and practiced. "This is it," he said, his voice a whisper of awe and fear. "This is everything. The Miller case wasn't just a cold case, Lena. It was a cover-up, a syndicate. They were funneling millions, maybe billions, through shell companies, fronting as a private security firm. The Millers weren't just a family. He was an analyst. She was a reporter. They found something big, and they were going to blow the lid off of it. They got close. Too close. That's why I went dark. I was getting too close. They got to me first, but they didn't kill me. They tried to break me. They put my reputation in a coffin and buried it." "And Miller?" Lena asked, her voice tight. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with a bitter sadness. "Sergeant Miller. He was my partner, my best friend. He sold me out, Lena. He's one of them. He's the one who set me up. And now he's doing the same to you. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The betrayal was staggering. But why? Money, power, fear, Elias said, his voice hard. They promised him the world, and in return, he gave them my life. And now he wants yours. He wants that bag. But we have a secret weapon they don't know about. He pulled a small silver box from his toolbox. This, he said, is a portable decryption key. I built it years ago. It's the only way to get into these files without tripping their digital alarms. But it's not just a key. It's a mirror. It records every attempt to hack the drive. And if we do this right, it'll not only unlock the files, but it will also expose every single person who has tried to access them. We'll have a complete chain of evidence. We? Lena asked, the word feeling alien and foreign on her tongue. We, he repeated, his eyes meeting hers. You found this, Lena. This is your case now. You and me, and that dog. He gave Axel a nod of respect. But we have a problem. They know you have the bag, and they're not going to wait for you to make a move. They're coming for us. As if on cue, the sound of a helicopter blade slicing through the morning mist could be heard in the distance. It was a low, steady thrum, growing louder with every passing second. They're not sending cops, Lena, Elias said, his voice low and serious. They're sending contractors. They're sending the same men who came for you at the crash site. They're coming to clean this up once and for all. Elias stood up, pulling a shotgun out of his toolbox, a grim determination etched into every line on his face. We have to finish this, he said, looking at the bag. We have to unlock this data before they get here. This is our last stand. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. The only way out is through, he said, his voice unwavering. Justice is coming, Lena, and it's going to be messy. The final, devastating twist, the helicopter, was not the only vehicle approaching. As the unmistakable thrum of a Black Hawk helicopter grew closer, another sound, low and guttural, resonated from the ground. The unmistakable roar of a beat-up old truck, the same kind she had used to get here, came barreling down the road. It wasn't just them coming for her, it was a familiar face, a friend, a former colleague. And as the truck screeched to a halt, she could see the silhouette of the man she thought was her friend, a friend who was about to make a choice that would change everything. The roar of the truck's engine was a familiar, guttural sound, one Lena knew from countless rides to the shooting range or late-night coffee runs. It was a sound that, just yesterday, would have meant safety. Now it was another harbinger of doom. As the old pickup skidded to a halt in the mud, its headlights cutting through the gray mist, Lena saw him. Officer Ryan Hayes, her partner, her confidant, the man she had trusted implicitly for the last 2 years. He jumped out, his face a mask of frantic concern, his gaze darting from the cabin to the sky, where the thrumming of the helicopter blades was growing deafeningly loud. "Lena, what the hell is going on?" he yelled, his voice strained. "Miller put out an APB. They're saying you're armed and dangerous, that you stole evidence." Lena's hand tightened on her sidearm. "It's a lie, Ryan. All of it. He set me up." Elias stepped to the door, his shotgun held loosely but with lethal intent. "He's with them, Lena. The truck, the timing. It's too perfect." Ryan's eyes widened, a look of genuine shock on his face. "Elias? What are you doing here? I heard you were... I don't know what I heard." He looked at Lena, then at Elias, then back at Lena, a desperate plea for clarity in his eyes. "What are you talking about? Miller is a good cop. He's our sergeant." "He's a traitor," Elias stated flatly. "He's part of the syndicate. He sold me out, and now he's selling you out." The helicopter was directly overhead now, a dark, menacing silhouette against the pale sky. The sound was unbearable, a physical weight pressing down on them. A powerful spotlight suddenly blazed down, blinding them. The world was reduced to A cone of white light and the deafening roar of the blades. On the ground. Now, with your hands on your head. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, cutting through the noise. It was a man's voice, not a cop's. It was the same calm, flat voice from the crash site. Lena had to make a choice, and she had to make it now. Trust her gut or trust her partner. She looked at Ryan. His face was etched with confusion and fear, but there was a deep well of loyalty. In his eyes that she had always seen, he had never lied to her. Not once. "Ryan, the bag," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's in the cabin. It has evidence that could bring down the whole city. Miller's involved. He framed us." He stared at her, a fierce, internal battle playing out on his face. He had 2 years of trust in Lena versus a lifetime of respect for Miller and the force. Then, the first shot rang out. It wasn't aimed at them, but at the ground by their feet, a clear warning. It came from the men rappelling from the helicopter, black-clad figures dropping like spiders from a web. The decision was made for him. Without a word, Ryan unclipped his own sidearm, not to point at Lena, but to point at the men coming out of the helicopter. "Get inside! I'll cover you!" he yelled. Lena didn't need to be told twice. She and Elias scrambled back into the cabin, pulling Axel in behind them. Elias slammed the door shut, locking it with the deadbolt. The wood was old, splintered, and would hold for about 2 seconds against a determined assault. "He's a fool," Elias said, a grim admiration in his voice. "He's going to get himself killed." "He's a good cop," Lena said, her own voice filled with a desperate, fierce pride. "He's not like you or me. He's not broken yet." Gunfire erupted outside. The old wood of the cabin door splintered with the first volley of shots. They had to act fast. Elias was already on the floor, the bag open, the silver decryption box connected to one of the data drives. He was a man possessed, his fingers moving with a frantic, practiced speed, his mind a steel trap of algorithms and code. "I need more time," he muttered, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "They're using a quantum scrambler. It's not going to be easy." Lena looked out the window, a small, grimy pane of glass. She could see Ryan, crouched behind the beat-up truck, returning fire. He was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and outnumbered. He was a hero in a battle he couldn't win. "Axel, stay," she commanded the dog, who was whimpering, his ears pinned back, his instincts screaming for him to protect his master. She then turned to Elias. "I'm going to give you some time. Just get it done." Elias didn't look up. "Just don't get yourself killed, Lena. You're our only chance." She went out the back door, stepping into the foggy woods, a ghost in the gray light. The helicopter was now hovering lower, its searchlight raking the ground, looking for an entry point. She moved with silent, feline grace, using the trees and the terrain as cover. She could see the figures in black moving in a pincer formation, closing in on the cabin. She had an idea. It was crazy. It was reckless. But it was the only thing she could think of that might buy them time. The lake. She crept to the edge of the water, its surface as smooth and gray as a mirror. She knew the lake bed. It was a rocky, uneven mess. She began to hurl rocks into the water, one after another, creating loud, echoing splashes. The men in black, hearing the noise, immediately focused on the area, thinking she was trying to cross the lake. The helicopter turned its spotlight, illuminating the water, its crew searching for a swimmer they thought they had cornered. It bought them a few precious seconds. But she knew it wouldn't last. She had to do something more. She ran back into the woods, to the abandoned truck she had hotwired. She still had the keys in her pocket. She jumped in, turning the key in the ignition. The engine coughed to life, a loud, glorious protest against the silence. She put it in reverse and slammed on the gas, backing it up, not toward the road but toward the cabin, its lights off, a ghost in the dark. She was going to create a diversion. She was going to make them think she was in the truck trying to get away. But as she backed up, she saw something in the rearview mirror that made her blood run cold. Another vehicle, a black sedan, was parked a few hundred yards away, hidden in the brush. And in the front seat, she could just make out the silhouette of a man. His face was turned toward the cabin, and as she watched, he picked up a pair of binoculars, Sergeant Miller. He wasn't just directing from a distance. He was here, watching the whole thing unfold. And as she watched, a grim, triumphant smile spread across his face. The final devastating twist. The man in the black sedan wasn't just Sergeant Miller. He was Sergeant Miller, and he was holding a sniper rifle. He wasn't there to watch. He was there to make sure no one walked out of this alive. And as he raised the rifle to his shoulder, his scope locked onto a single, unsuspecting target. The very first person who had shown up trying to save them. He had a clean shot at Ryan. The glint of sun on the sniper rifle's scope was a horrifying mirror, reflecting the grim, triumphant smile on Sergeant Miller's face. He wasn't there to watch. He was there to execute. The crosshairs of his rifle were locked on Ryan, who was still crouched behind the pickup truck, a loyal, valiant shield against an enemy he didn't even understand. The betrayal, sharp as a knife blade, cut through Lena's shock. In that split second, she didn't see her sergeant. She saw a killer, a man who had sold his soul and was about to sell another. There was no time for a call, no time to warn Ryan. He was focused on the helicopter, on the men closing in. He would never see Miller coming. The roaring engine of the old truck became her weapon. She didn't put it in reverse to get away. She slammed the gas, the ancient vehicle lurching forward, not toward the cabin, but toward the hidden black sedan. It was a kamikaze play, a desperate Hail Mary, a final gamble for her partner's life. She drove blindly, her eyes streaming from the wind and the smoke from the sputtering engine. She heard the first pop of Miller's sniper rifle, a sharp crack, that was swallowed by the roar of the helicopter. The bullet, she knew, had missed its mark. The truck, her truck, had become a moving target, drawing his attention. She crashed through the thick brush, the truck lurching and groaning, the sound a symphony of metal and breaking branches. Miller, startled, turned his rifle toward her. But it was too late. With a deafening crunch of steel on steel, the old pickup smashed into the side of the black sedan. The impact was violent, jarring Lena against the steering wheel. Her head hit the glass, a blinding flash of pain, but she didn't black out. She was alive. Miller, caught off guard, was thrown violently against the driver's side window. The sniper rifle flew from his grasp, landing in the mud. He was dazed, shocked, the grim certainty on his face replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. Lena, adrenaline coursing through her veins, scrambled out of her truck, her sidearm now in her hand. She moved with a silent, predatory grace. Her training finally kicking in, overriding the shock and the pain. She was no longer a cop on the run, she was a hunter. Miller staggered out of his own vehicle, his hand going to his hip, but it was too late. Lena had him dead to rights. "Drop it, Miller," she said, her voice low and dangerously calm. "It's over." His face, a mask of fury and humiliation, twisted into a sneer. "It's never over, Petrova. You're a dead woman. And your little friend is next." Before he could finish his sentence, a shot rang out. But it wasn't from Lena's gun. The bullet hit the ground next to Miller's foot, a puff of mud and dirt. The second shot was a warning, a message. Elias was standing on the porch of the cabin, the heavy shotgun now in his hands, its barrel smoking. Ryan, disoriented but alive, was now beside him, his own gun trained on the scene. "She's not alone, Sergeant," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly promise. "And you're not the only one with a gun." Gunfire from the helicopter, now circling the cabin, became more frantic, less controlled. They had lost their tactical advantage. The element of surprise was gone. And then, a new sound joined the symphony of chaos. A different kind of siren, not the mournful wail of an APB, but the sharp, triumphant cry of official law enforcement. The cavalry had arrived. Inside the cabin, the silver decryption box had finally finished its work. A single, blinking green light signaled its success. The data, the evidence that had been buried for years, was now free. Elias, with shaking hands, had found a way to send a single, compressed file to the one person he could still trust. The chief of police, a man he had served with for decades. The file contained a single damning piece of evidence, an audio file. The confession of a crooked analyst, the one who had worked on the Miller case, detailing the entire conspiracy, the names, the dates, the shell companies, and the players. Miller's name was mentioned in the first 2 minutes. The sight of the police cruisers, sirens blaring, arriving on the scene was a catharsis. The men in black, outmaneuvered and now outgunned, quickly surrendered. The helicopter, seeing the overwhelming show of force, peeled away into the clouds, disappearing as quickly as it had arrived. The aftermath was a surreal blur. The smell of gun smoke and ozone hung in the air. Ryan was alive, shaken, but uninjured. Lena, her head bandaged and a sling on her arm, stood side by side with Elias, a silent bond forged in fire and betrayal. Axel, his gash treated, stood proudly at her side, a hero in his own right. Miller, handcuffed and defeated, was led away, his face a mask of bitter, impotent rage. His empire had crumbled in a matter of hours, brought down by a stray dog, a rogue cop, and a broken old man. A few days later, Lena and Elias were in a hospital waiting room, a different kind of waiting room, one filled with the scent of antiseptic and the low hum of medical equipment. A doctor came out, a tired, compassionate smile on his face. Leo and his mother, he said, were going to be okay. They were in protective custody, and as soon as they were well enough, they would be moved to a safe place. Lena and Elias were given a chance to see them. Leo, his head wrapped in a bandage, smiled a genuine toothy grin when he saw Axel. The mother, her arm in a cast, looked at Elias and simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his sacrifice and his final victory. "The locket," Lena said, holding out the half-heart she had found. "What does it mean?" Elias looked at it, a sad, knowing smile on his face. "It's not a locket, Lena. It's a key, a digital key." He pointed to the locket around the boy's neck, its matching half-heart. "They were the two halves of a key. When you put them together, they unlocked the files. She knew they would come for her, so she split the key. She hid the evidence and she gave one half to the only person she could trust, her son. She knew he wouldn't let it go." The final, devastating beat. The locket was not just a symbol of love and family. It was the final, ingenious piece of the puzzle. The mother, a brilliant journalist, had planned for every eventuality, a testament to her courage and her love for her son. The true justice was not just that the conspirators were caught, but that the truth was finally set free, all because a little boy had pulled his rescuer from the wreck and a canine found what was hidden next.